Hey, everybody. Today, we're exploring a conversation that's not just about being on the right side of history, but about expanding our capacity for empathy, understanding, and love. Our guest, Daye Pope, is a trailblazer who is constantly pushing boundaries and expanding minds, defying stereotypes, challenging the status quo, and all sorts of other good stuff that we ought to be doing every day. They is a tireless advocate for transgender rights, an eloquent speaker, a brilliant strategist, and an inspiring organizer who has spearheaded important initiatives for the trans and non-binary communities. In her passion and dedication, they are matched only by her commitment to education, empowerment, and promoting a culture of inclusivity. Today, we're not only going to learn about Daye's impressive journey, but also how each one of us can play an important part in promoting acceptance and equality. So let's open our minds, lean into discomfort, and welcome Daye Pope, a beacon of resilience, a testament to power, influence, and all the awesomeness that there is in this world. Love having Daye here, and here we go. Daye, I'm excited to talk to you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. You make me sound so good. So I'm
You are
excited to
so
be
good.
here.
That's what it is. Let's jump right in. So, easy one. Let's start with this. Explain your core advocacy, the work that you do, and why it's vital for people to become like active supporters of the trans and non-binary communities.
I started like a lot of young people are right now, where I was a young gender nonconforming kid in school and I had to deal with bullying and I had to deal with some discrimination from the school. And it was hard when I was just, a teenager trying to live my life and see my friends at lunch and all of those normal teen things. And that led me to start a gender and sexuality alliance at my high school with some friends of mine. And ever since then, I just have connected to progressive causes in a lot of different ways and loved how it felt to be connected to things bigger than myself, and
Yep.
started to realize it wasn't just my experience, but so many other people's experience to have dealt with all of these really hard things, especially as young people.
Yep.
And so right now I've been organizing for the last couple of years with a group called T.A.K.E, which is an amazing Black trans-led organization doing civic engagement work, which is just a really fancy way of saying trying to get people involved in the political process, trying to make sure that everyday people who are queer, who are trans, who are allies, who just care about justice in whatever way can get involved. And that's what I'm most excited about, more than talking about, what I've done.
Yeah. Okay. That's what we'll talk about then. So, how do you like communicate like the urgency of issues, that trans and non-binary people face to the cis world? How do you communicate that urgency and get them to understand, hey, it's them right now. It could be us. How do we get everyone together? How do you communicate that?
Yeah, I think about this type of a question a lot. And so much of it comes down to the fact that many of us are advocating for a group that's ultimately a minority group, a smaller marginalized group of people. And so kind of understandably, really, sometimes the majority will say, I don't really know how this relates to me though. Like I've got
Right.
my own concerns. I have to pick up my kids from school. I've got a lot going on in my life. And so I try to bring things back to universal values and a broader vision of the world that we want to build. So instead of just being about carving out a special protected place for queer and trans people and non-binary folks, I want to talk about how all of us can live in a world where we can express ourselves more fully, where we can be human, where we're not as limited by these kind of gender norms and these narrow constraints on who we're supposed to be just because of who we were born as. Um, and that can sometimes get through to people, talking about the fact that, all of us want to live our lives in a free way. We don't want people to be scrutinizing how we dress. We don't want to feel like the possibilities of our lives are all dependent on just, what our bodies looked like when we were born. We want to feel like anything is possible, and we can dream big, and we can explore, and we can fall in love. And if we talk about these kind of universal things and relate them back to the fight, right now, all of our rights to our own bodies are being attacked. When you attack reproductive justice, when legislators attack trans people's ability to get the healthcare that we need, that's an attack on all of us being able to make decisions about our bodies and being able to access healthcare. And sometimes that can click a little bit more with people where they're like, oh yeah, I don't want the government to tell me, what healthcare I can access, or
Mm-hmm.
how to dress, or how to live my life. So I wouldn't want that for you either.
That you wrote an essay, and the title, I don't remember the exact title, but you had two terms in the title. There was feeling comfortable and feeling safe. And at first I was going like, oh no, those are definitely different things. I thought at first, oh, I'm comfortable at this. No, you need to feel safe. Talk about that, because that is a huge distinction between those two things.
Yeah, it's interesting as we talk about schools, which there's such a battle over schools right now. And are our schools going to be a culture war battleground, or are we going to let them be a place for learning? And so much of this is adults really picking on trans kids and attacking trans kids' ability to
Mhm.
just move through schools, which is horrifying. But something that really clicked for me was that there's arguments being made that, you know, any student who feels uncomfortable in like a bathroom or a locker room with a trans person, that protecting their ability to feel comfort is the most important thing. And I think the ideal is that all of our kids feel comfortable, but I think what's more important is that all of our kids are safe. And sometimes differences make us uncomfortable, and that's not a uniquely conservative thing, that's just a human thing. And sometimes we feel like when we're out of our comfort zone, when we're around people who are not the same as us or our family, that can bring up discomfort. But we're getting to this point in society where sometimes people on all sides feel like they should be able to be protected from any kind of difference or information that makes them feel uncomfortable. And I think that we have to push back against that no matter where it's coming from, because schools should teach the troubled history of our country, and that might make some people uncomfortable, but that is the reality, that there are some dark things in this country's history. We should include all kids, including kids that are different than the majority, and that might make some in the majority uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that that's wrong. And I think we can use those as teachable moments where we can talk about, you might be a Christian kid and you are a little uncomfortable because you don't understand your Muslim co-student, but that doesn't mean you have a right to keep them from being in your space or to tell them not to worship. And it's a little bit similar with trans kids.
Yep.
Some kids might be uncomfortable because it's new to them to be around queer and trans kids. That doesn't mean they have a right to be protected from ever being around someone different from them. And I think we should be preparing our kids to be aware that they live in a multiracial democracy. They live in a diverse world, and we can work through that discomfort. It doesn't just have to be shutting that discomfort down.
Yeah. You know what? Let's talk about that for a second, because I think a lot of prejudices, I guess, come from not knowing what it is that you're even maybe prejudiced against. So, like, what are some of the, like, I don't know, common misconceptions about trans and non-binary communities that might, I don't know, they're barriers to like getting people to support the community?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Right now, with young people, there's so much misinformation about what it is to be a trans or non-binary young person. So
Break
a
it
lot
down
of
for us. Yeah.
a lot of people think that minors who are very young are getting irreversible medical treatments. And there's a lot of scare tactics about, oh my gosh, we can't let these kids identify as trans and get all these medical treatments. They're too young to understand any of that. But an 8-year-old who's coming to their parents or their guardians and is saying, hey, I'm having these feelings, is not getting any treatments that can't be reversed. They're mostly just accessing counseling and therapy to talk about how they feel more. And that's the main way that young trans folks are getting any kind of services, is starting to talk to people. And then there's, social transition, where maybe at school they're going to start to go by a different pronoun, they're going to wear different clothes. But I think there's been so many well-meaning people that have been caught up in the misinformation that's saying they're giving surgeries out to kids like candy, and some just scare tactics that aren't true. And
Let
I
me
think,
stop you there for a second, because you've said some stuff that I think is really key. You have the 8-year-old coming to the adult, right? And then you've got the people you've got, so that's one thing. The 8-year-old is aware that something is different, right? They're different than the people in school with them. Then what happens from there, and the thing that I just heard, was the people in the schools try to convince them possibly that they are not what they think they are. And so now we've got this, I don't even know the right word for it, where people think that the 8-year-old is being brainwashed, whereas the 8-year-old is just being the 8-year-old. And so once someone starts talking to them, it sounds like people think, oh, you're brainwashing this kid into keeping this wrong identity. Um, but that's not the case. The case is the 8-year-old saying, I'm different, help me. And people are saying, you're not different, you've been brainwashed by someone else.
yeah. And the reality is really the opposite. The entire world is telling this kid, this is who you are, and
Mhm.
this is how you have to be. And this kid is often the one who's starting to suffer in their grades, in their mental health, because they're saying, no, something is different for me. And I want to try to understand that. I want to try to, read some books about this. I want to try to go to therapy. I want to talk to my guardians if they're safe. And the other side that are saying, no, this isn't real, are actively trying to take those books out of the school libraries. They're actively trying to keep school counselors, from being able to talk to these kids about their experiences. And so, it's never about trying to push this child in a certain direction for people who are advocates. It's about trying to make sure that all of our kids are safe and they can access safe places to talk about what they're going through, so that they continue to figure out who they are, because that's really what growing up is about in general. But it's
Mhm.
especially hard for some of these kids who start to question whether or not they might be LGBT, because suddenly everything is so politicized and there's so many people telling them that they can't be that way, or that someone in their life must have made them that way. And that's another thing that we have to fight against, because there's sort of this idea that, reading the wrong book or having an adult in your life who's LGBTQ will turn someone into, a trans person or what have you. But that's not the case. Some people innately feel a sense of who they are as being different than what the world has been trying to push them to be. And then people try to seek out role models and information, books and mentors and things like that. But it's not the book or the mentor that makes them that way.
There's a question I have here, and is that school counselor. Let's say that 8-year-old makes it to the school counselor, but the school counselor is not on the side of the trans non-binary community. They are of the mindset, oh, oh, thank God you found me, because now I'm going to fix you. How do we get counselors into the situations, into the schools, that actually are open-minded and forward-thinking enough that they can actually help these kids? Because that can be a huge block right there, right?
Yeah, definitely. This is a fight that organizing partners and I are engaged in right now in the state of Pennsylvania, because we're seeing that school districts around the state are passing anti-trans district policies that are hurting our kids, and there's no statewide guidance that standardizes any of it. So in one school district, you could have affirming, safe adults and policies. And in the school district right next door, those kids are being, taught that they can't be trans, they're not being included, they're being discriminated against. And so we're actually fighting for a slate of bills that are protecting trans kids by setting school standards across the state of Pennsylvania, which there are school district policies about all kinds of stuff, anti-bullying, about how you include students of, different abilities and all of these things. But we don't right now have a policy that says, you can't discriminate. All of our kids need to be safe in schools, because I feel like right now we're in this strange place in our society where, you know, we're seeing legislators who are more worried about a trans kid in a locker room than about a Glock in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we have some real issues to work on to protect our kids from violence and from so many issues that they're facing, mental health crises that are increasing every year. But this issue of including LGBTQ kids, this is a central piece of it, because as long as we're fighting over this, we're not dealing with some of the real issues in education. And also, that's hurting the mental health even more of these kids who are themselves LGBTQ, or who are just questioning, or who are not even a part of the community, but that are going to school and being distracted from their studies and their friends by this culture war that's raging around them.
What do you think is the better, I'll use the word philosophy or way to make change happen? You've got I'll go back to the civil rights. You got the MLK way, Martin Luther King way, where it was more passive and trying to talk to people. And then we have the Malcolm X, Black Panthers way of, we're going to get in your face and we're going to make change happen. Like, what works? What do you think works?
Oh gosh, that's such a big question. I feel like we really need a little bit of all of it in different situations. But my favorite quote about organizing is that organizing is a fancy word for relationship building.
Yes.
And so I feel like whatever we do, we have to center relationship building. And sometimes being really stringent and getting in people's faces doesn't serve in that situation the relationships we need to build, and vice versa. Like sometimes we just have to be thoughtful about what's going to build this relationship, because ultimately, I think right now in the age of social media, we're in this moment where there are a lot more people who are willing and interested in being firebrands and saying the most extreme thing, and maybe getting a following of like-minded people online. But in terms of organizing, which is trying to bring people together to achieve material wins about policies, laws, union contracts, like all kinds of different concrete wins, I think sometimes that skill set doesn't serve us that well. Like saying the most extreme thing online, getting people riled up, the constant outrage, that serves its purpose. But I think when you're actually trying to do the nitty gritty of like passing a new law or changing certain things, you have to be bringing in new people and building relationships.
Do we have to start at the level of passing the law, or do we want to start? I know you're working on passing the laws, but I guess in conjunction with that, do we want to work with the communities in general? In other words, I don't know if you have to go to the churches and say, look, here's somebody that is trans, here's someone that's non-binary. Let's talk to this person and understand who they are, and ask your congregation, ask your schoolmates. Let's all just talk and at least get those people thinking in a different direction and go like, huh, I didn't really know that. Are those conversations happening?
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece of things. A lot of these issues, whether you're working towards any kind of justice,
Mm-hmm.
can feel like, here's this huge issue and what can I do? I feel powerless in the face of this big thing. And I think it's really important to just find your piece of the puzzle, whether it is organizing your congregation or your student group at your high school, or running for office or trying to pass laws. Like there are a lot of different roles and ways that people can get involved. And I think, being in your neighborhood association, making sure that your local businesses are affirming, like there's so many pieces of the puzzle that need doing. And instead of focusing too much on the huge despair of how there's so much wrong, focusing on what small piece you can take on and really do yourself and with your partner and your family and your friends and your community is the best way to do things. And I often talk about, when I'm talking to folks about organizing, it's very attractive right now, especially when many of us are so online, to think about every like national issue or these big issues in other states. Even like when Don't Say Gay bill, which is horrific, was passed in Florida and made it so that teachers could be fired just for talking about LGBTQ identities, even if it was pertinent to talking about literature or anything like that. A lot of people all over the country donated and got involved and got fired up. And I think that's great. And I want to encourage people to do that. And I know that there's a fight in your own backyard that relates to that struggle. And so sometimes we get caught up in what's happening at the national level, what's happening in other states. But a lot of states now have passed Don't Say Gay bills, including Alabama. A lot of states are trying to pass these anti-trans and anti-queer laws. And also a lot of just local issues are bubbling up. So it's like, look at your own backyard, figure out what you can do there before you try to address everything everywhere, because no one can.
What are like? By the way, shout out to Illinois for the first state that's. I think they just passed legislation where you can't ban books in libraries. So shout out to Illinois, way to go.
We need more of that.
Yep. What is it that if you're talking to somebody who's in your face and says, I really don't like this whole trans thing. I think it's all made up. I think you're pedophiles. I think you're ruining our society. You're talking to this person one on one right here. Have you ever had that situation where you're talking to that person and you've listened to them and then you understood what they want and then you come back and answer their issues and then they've melted and they go, I'm like, okay, I kind of get that now. Does that ever happen? Has it happened for you?
Yeah, I think it's tough. You do have to know when to walk away if you're not safe, or it's hard sometimes because some people are just hard nosed and they're going to be anti and there's nothing you can do. But there have been times when I've gone to like a school board meeting where folks are talking about trans policies, and I've met a mom who received a pamphlet of misinformation, and she's genuinely concerned about her daughter's safety in school.
Okay.
We know that trans people are not dangerous, right? But I had a conversation with this parent and I realized, so many of the advocates would immediately say, "You're transphobic. You're the worst. I can't believe that you think that this is dangerous." But she received some propaganda and it was compelling. And it's very natural for parents to be concerned about the well-being of their kids. And sexual abuse and assault is a huge problem in this country. And so it makes sense to be really worried about, especially your young daughter, and just wanting to make sure that she's safe, right?
Mhm.
And so with this conversation, just reflecting that back, like I know that you are a good person who's just trying to watch out for your daughter, and that's a really actually human thing that you're feeling, and I relate to that.
Nice.
And at the same time, here's where we've gone wrong. Like the threat is not from a co-student at school who happens to be trans. Like we have bigger things that we can work on to try to protect our kids from this kind of violence. And I'm not sure that we landed in the exact same place on trans rights, but there was an inkling of understanding and human connection. And so I think you have to understand who's just hateful and who's genuinely misled or doesn't understand, but could be open if you immediately don't just go to condemnation, but if you try to listen and sort of pull apart, like, what is the concern here?
Yeah. What have you found is the biggest concern for people who are anti-trans? What is that one thing you go like, yeah, they're going to say this, and you know it right off the bat?
Lately, it's been the concern, the groomer, hateful language, being concerned that kids are being misled by adults. And that's obviously not what's happening. And it's the same attack that was used in the 70s to try to oust teachers who were gay
Hmm.
from being able to work in schools. It was saying they're going to prey on our kids, they're going to turn our kids gay, which is obviously ridiculous, but it preys on that fear that parents have. But again, I think that parents are they're very legitimate and understandable fear for their kids is being weaponized by these hateful groups that are spending a lot of money and time trying to get them to think that this is a threat to their kids. But again, no adult can turn your kid into anything that your kid isn't, right? And we've actually seen this on the flip side with conversion therapy, which is not a real form of therapy, but is a form of psychological torture that tries to convince kids that are queer or trans that they're actually not.
Hmm.
It doesn't work. It is just ineffective. It increases the rates of suicide and self-harm, but it does not change anyone's identity. And so we already know that even when you put kids in these really intense therapeutic settings, you can't make them be anything that they're not. And so on the flip side too, there's no one who can convince your kid and make your kid be trans or queer. And I think people are afraid that their kid might come out to them or that they might have to navigate things that feel uncomfortable and new to them. But no parent is always ready for everything that their kids come to them with. And I think it's important to remember that if these kids have a guardian or a parent who is supportive, they're so much more likely to live to be happy, healthy adults than if they don't. And so the best thing you can do as a parent is just be loving to your kid no matter what they tell you about who they are.
Have you ever had one person give you an example of some child that they know who has been groomed, who has, and they can give you an example of this person who used to be so straight has now become so trans, I can't deal with it? Have you ever had anyone give you an example of that?
No,
I've never
no
seen
one
an example.
can.
Never.
Mm-mm.
All right. Let's do something. I want to find out some more about you, about your activism, about everything that you do. We're gonna play a little bit a game called This or That. I'm gonna give you two choices. You can choose one or the other, but not neither or both. And let's just keep this conversation going with that for just a moment. I'll start with some easy ones, and then we'll go a little bit harder, then a little bit harder, and then maybe thoughtful. We'll see what happens. Um, let's start with easy. What about pronouns? Would you them, they, or zero?
Them, they.
Them, they. Okay. How about advocating through social media or personal conversations?
Personal conversations.
Okay. I agree with personal conversations, by the way. Exactly the way to go. Supporting existing organizations or starting new ones?
Oh, that's hard. Existing, though, there's a lot that are already so great.
Yeah. You have any other than take? You want to have any that you want to point out for us?
Yes. The PA Coalition for Trans Youth in Pennsylvania, we work with a lot, have been doing great work. And I know that the Equality Federation around the country has been supporting LGBTQ statewide groups
Uh,
for years and have been doing really great work.
awesome. So let's say explaining gender identity, visual aids like spectrum diagrams or analogies.
Analogies.
Okay. I would ask you to come up with them, but I know on the spot it's hard to come up with one unless you just have one.
I like a mosaic.
Mhm.
Humanity is like a mosaic. Everybody's unique, a unique piece of the whole.
That's actually really good. And it makes a beautiful picture when you're done. Okay. Let's get a little harder. Advocate through speeches or through writing?
Speeches.
Okay. Um, large scale activism like rallies and protests, or small scale personal activism like educating friends and family?
I say protests. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Have you seen protests be um, hugely successful?
I have. I think that it's about just knowing what your goals are. Sometimes
Mhm.
we protest and the goal is just that we're mad as hell and we can't take it anymore, and that's
Right.
okay. But I think it's better when you have a specific goal. We're trying to convince these people or this institution to do this action, and protest is one of our ways of pressuring them.
Okay. Okay. How about be the face of a movement or work behind the scenes?
Work behind the scenes.
Okay. Advocacy work with adults or with younger generation?
Younger generation.
Okay.
I
I,
believe the children are our future.
you know what? You know who really is into marketing to the younger generation is, and I'm not saying they're good or bad, but the companies like McDonald's, you start McDonald's when they're small and they grow up and they're still living on McDonald's. So I think you have a point there about starting with the younger generation because it becomes part of who they are. You know?
Yes, and I think Gen Z is already so ahead of the curve of any other generation on accepting LGBTQ folks and identifying as LGBTQ. So
Mhm.
I think it's them leading us at this point, and we should follow their lead.
Okay. Let's get a little harder. Would you rather have a world that completely understands the concept of gender fluidity or a world where the concept of gender doesn't even exist?
Concept of gender doesn't even exist.
Okay,
Maybe we could all just be extra free.
there you go. Live in a world where everyone is exactly the same or live in a world where everyone is completely unique.
Completely unique. I think we already live in that world
The one where everyone's exactly the same or unique?
where we're all unique.
We are unique. We just got to get everyone to understand the uniqueness of others, right?
Yes.
Okay. How about have your work recognized globally but with strong opposition, or have your work recognized locally with unanimous support?
Locally, with unanimous support, I think that's where most of the change really happens, is in our smaller pieces of the puzzle.
Okay. How about let's do a little, this one's out there a little bit. How about go back in time and change one thing or see the future of your advocacy?
Oh gosh. We know what happens in all the movies and books when you try to go back and change something. So I'm going to say future.
I don't know. Did it work out for Marty McFly? I'm not sure if it did or not.
Sort of.
Okay. Would you rather have the power to read minds or the power to change minds?
Change minds.
Yeah, I actually think we have both of those, but not quite like these science fiction or supernatural um, movies, books, and magazines would have us believe. But we can do those things, and I think you are changing minds. So
Thank you.
constantly fight against discrimination, but with a supportive community, or live in a discrimination-free world, but completely alone.
Community.
Yeah.
I think we're social creatures. We have to have community.
Okay. About instantly change the views on gender and identity, but no one knows it was you, or slowly and painstakingly change the world's view, but be recognized for your work.
No one knows it was me.
Okay. Behind the scenes, you could be Spider-Man.
Secret identity.
There you go. I got two more for you. Have an absolute understanding of yourself or an absolute understanding from everyone else about you?
Oh, wow. We're getting very deep.
I'm telling you, they get harder.
Absolute understanding of self, I think.
Okay. Okay. Here's the last one. I'm going to read this one out. I'll read it slowly. What is one experience or interaction in your life that dramatically shaped your understanding of gender identity and transgender rights? And how do you believe sharing this story could impact perceptions and promote empathy among those less familiar with the trans and non-binary community?
Wow.
Last one. They don't get any harder than that.
I've told the story before of going overseas for gender affirming surgery and how I was really nervous to tell my family about the fact that I was taking that step. And when I did, my mom actually said, "Okay, I'm coming with you." And we went from, support, but still maybe some distance, lack of understanding, to having this experience together. We're at one of the most vulnerable points in my life. My mom was there holding my hand as I'm waking up from surgery, and just how that meant the entire world to me to have my family supporting me through that moment of becoming, and how I feel like that sort of brought us closer and bridged some kind of, I don't know, emotional distance or something. And I feel like I like to tell that story and think about that because we're often talking so much about what happens when families don't support queer and trans people and how painful and damaging that is. But sometimes we don't talk enough about how healing and beautiful it is when you do have your family, whether born into or chosen, there for you when you need them most. And that coming out as trans, coming out as queer doesn't have to break down these relationships. It can actually make them stronger.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I when you said that, she was holding your hand when you woke up, I was like, oh, that gets me.
I know. It still gets me too when I think about it and get teary.
Gosh. I want people to stay in touch with you and be part of your advocacy and have them learn from you about how to start their own advocacy. Also, they can get in touch with you at dishwithdaye.com and they can read your essays that you write. You write one a week, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're also all over Instagram at Daydreamy. And I told you how much I just love your name. So
Thank you.
they can become daydream believers. I know you've heard
There
that one
you
before.
go. Oh, yeah. Great song.
It is a great song. So, Daye, thank you so much for being on. This has been a fantastic conversation. I love listening to you. So, we'll have to do it again in the future.
Yes,
Uh,
please. Thank you so much for hosting such important conversations.
You are very welcome. And I want to say goodbye, everybody.